One of the things a lot of people don't know is that bullies don't have any friends. Anybody here actually been a bully at school? Come on, Frank, you can't You?
I'd just like to add a quick other point about bullying the community. I forgot to mention management in the sense that employees that get outcomes are usually liked by management, and if they do it by bullying or team members, that's a blind eye's turn to that because that person is good at achieving outcomes. So I think that's another element that needs to be considered.
Yeah, good point, thanks for making it. So, a bully, and you'll see a kid saying this in the video, is triumphant, yes. Wins every fight, yes. But are they happy? Is triumphant being happy? Is winning make you happy? There's a buzz that happens when you win a race or you win a game. It's like a sort of a big buzz. And then later on you might even crash, you might even get a little depressed when the game's over. Have you ever had that with football or something? Monday-itis, when you're back to work again? Now, when a bully changes into a friend, or what Frank called upstander, that kid will tell you how good that feels. You cannot make a person like you. You can make them comply with you, you can make them obey you, you can treat them like dogs, and they'll put up with you if they're scared of you. Or whatever you do, you can't buy friendship. You can't make them like you. I call it the Saddam Hussein syndrome. A man who had full control of everybody, but everybody hated him, even his closest relatives. He knew that. So when a bully becomes an upstander, he has a better time. He says, I like this. I now have friends. I'm not alone. And I think this kid, did he? Was he old enough to do it? Did his grades change or not?
I don't know, was it a lot happier?
Well, happy kid, yeah. Now, moving on to this. There are a number of myths about bullying. Maybe you guys don't have this problem. It's not a normal part of growing up. It just simply happens when it's extreme in a way that impedes or stops a child from growing. It's not only children, we've made the point already. It's not always physical. It's not worse in boys than girls. If the intervention targets the bully, it's an absolute recipe for failure. And if a victim is treated as a sick person, it's also an absolute recipe for failure. Not that the victim will fail. The victim may get much better. Nor would necessarily the bully get worse if they were punished, put in a special school, or given psychiatric care. But as Frank points out, for every bully and victim, there's 2 or 3 waiting to take their place. Back to the community idea that has been raised at the back of the room there, very good ones. If you take something like child abuse, care of the elderly, violence in communities, and you spend huge amounts of money managing those problems, does it ever stop? I'm asking you. Whose money is that? Yours, right? So are you pouring your money down an endless pit? So you spend millions and millions of dollars on elder abuse and child abuse and violence, never getting to the cause of the problem. Where does it come from? So the idea behind this community effort, focusing on schools, is you try and prevent it from costing your community huge amounts of money for no change. The fact of the matter is, when you target the problem in this way, there will be no change. And here are a set of myths. I'm not going to go through all of these. Some are more relevant to the United States, some are more relevant to other countries. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at item number 3, the immediate response we all have to bullying is punish the bully. Is that a good idea?
Help the bully.
Huh?
Change the bully's behaviour.
punish a bully, bullying the bully is not going to help. Why not?
You can tell me why.
Become a better bully.
Well, he may become a better bully, but he won't be a happy bully. He'll become more and more isolated from his peers. I mean, he could be, but he won't be happy. So when you bully a bully, it's somewhat like trying to tell your kids to stop smoking cigarettes while you're puffing away on a cigarette. Have you ever tried that? I tried that years ago, it didn't work. They sort of look at you and say, Daddy, what are you doing? If you bully a bully, if you become one of these hard-nosed people that says, I will not tolerate that, you'll do nothing but promote bullying by example. So what happened is, most of the world stopped doing that years ago. Very few zero tolerance programs still exist. I don't know if you have any here in Australia. Except for one group that always seems to have trouble learning, and that's politicians. So what they do is put up anti-bullying legislation. Now it's a law, you can't bully. 48 of 50 states in America have anti-bullying legislation, none of which is funded by any government money. And what does it do? When somebody like me that sees a law against it, my first desire is to break the law. I don't want to see it. I might immediately become a bully just to be annoying. What legislation does is simply set it up with something that cannot be enforced and is no use because it has no teeth in it. It doesn't do anything that helps the problem. It just simply says, if you do this, you're a bully, and we don't like bullies. One teacher here said, and I imagine it may be true, that 10% of kids who are at school are there primarily because of a great deal of trouble and don't care at all for school. Well, those kids don't mind being bullies. And laws don't mean a single thing to them, and they can have an enormous impact on the school climate. The same principle says 70% of Australian schools have children in it who will do well anywhere. In other words, they're not really bullies and they're not bad kids. They're going to learn wherever they go. And about 20% of kids could go one way or the other. If you look at it that way, what this program suggests is you cannot manage the 10% who just want to see the school go away, the other 20% who could go one way or the other, without using the 70% who are good kids. The whole system has to come into play. Does that make any sense? Huh?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. A brief couple of two things Frank mentioned about homicide in the US. You see there a snapshot taken during the shootings. The boy in the front with the cap on backwards is Dylan Klebold, and the other boy is Eric Harris. Harris was a brilliant kid, probably a psychopath. He memorized Shakespeare. He had a scholarship in college in the 9th grade in mathematics. He was an absolutely brilliant child. Klebold similarly. Harris didn't care about people. Klebold was chronically depressed, miserably depressed. A sort of identity crisis, a shrink would probably call it. After a lot of bullying, these kids were so annoyed that, and it's hard to believe this, but when people get utterly focused on being bullied, they give up trying to be human. They became what we call avenging angels. They collect injustices. They build rage. These boys went onto many hate websites. In America, you can, if you've got a spare $30,000, get weapons-grade anthrax spores on the internet. Do you believe that? I doubt if you could in Australia, could you? It's very easy to buy machine guns, automatic weapons, and all sorts of explosives. You just pop on the internet and buy them. And they had done that and set up this process that became known as Columbine, the massacre. What is not known is those boys couldn't detonate a bomb. They never even looked up how to detonate a bomb. They learned all this from a video game manual called Hell on Earth that goes along with a video game called Doom 2. So none of their bombs went off. Both of them had serious injuries from hot machine guns that they tried popping off in the country. They didn't even know that when you pop off a machine gun, it gets red hot. They then went into the school and started spraying around, and after a while got sick of it. Were sitting around saying, this isn't much fun, all these people are dying, these are our friends. So after a while they just said, oh well, let's finish the rest of them off. So they ended up killing a few people by mistake probably. None of them could fire a weapon properly. Not blowing anybody up. In the meantime, this is where the community piece is fascinating. 750 policemen were gathering around there and unable to do a single thing for almost 4 hours, while these two boys, working out of a video game book, shot up all of these people without resistance. One boy of whom was hanging out of a building, shot in the head, alive for 3.5 hours. Nobody thought of picking him up. Now, why am I saying this? Because the community around that school was so shocked they could do nothing. When something that's unthinkably awful happens, adults go crazy. They couldn't think. The police couldn't act. Nobody knew what to do. Why? This was not a school in the ghetto. This was the second best high school in the United States. Most of the senior class would go to Ivy League schools like Harvard or Yale. This was a very model high school. What the homicides did was good, if you can say that, is that it created awareness in the affluent middle class, many of whom become doctors and attorneys and politicians, that violence is not confined to poor black people with hookers for mothers and fathers in prison living in poor accommodations and slums. It occurs in the affluent middle class, probably as commonly as it occurs in ghettos. What it did in the United States was create a panic in the affluent middle class when they realized there's no point in blaming violence on the poor. It's not a problem with the poor. There have been some really interesting studies that show that if you average everything out, violence is just as common in black as white people, and also Asian people, and is also common in the young and the old. There's no real way of distinguishing ethnographically or by socioeconomic level who will become violent. So I would say that's about the best thing that did. These boys were very bright, non-substance abusers, not violent, not weird-looking, had not had psychiatric care, and were all American boys, you might say. And they also didn't look funny. And yet they committed massive homicides. Similarly, this points out, by the way, just quickly, if you engage in intense shame and bullying, you can create a violent reaction, like an avenging process. If the violence is directed inwards, the kid will kill himself. If it's directed outwards, the kid will kill other people. Suicide and homicide are flip sides of the same coin. At the other end of this, suicide, which is, some people call suicide inverted homicide. And I happen to have the view that suicide is a form of retroflex murder. Murder of yourself rather than murder of somebody else.